We've been, for the last few weeks, we've been going through kind of starting right back at the beginning. Kind of what started the effect was the book I wrote called The Fifth Way. And I wrote that in the year leading up to the start of the effect. And so a lot of the premises and the just, I suppose, personal theology that we have been practicing here for the last 18 years is present in that book. And so kind of going back to basics, and I've felt this need since what Nina's going through, what Marion and I have been going through, and so many other people. It's like we need to get back to basics and just start to lay down the foundation of what it really means to follow Jesus. What does it really mean to understand? How can we possibly, as modern Westerners, sit at the feet of an ancient Eastern Aramaic sage as Jesus was? How do we learn from him? And so the fifth way is about the journey from west back to east, about the journey that a modern Westerner will need to take in order to be able to understand and comprehend and actually assimilate what Jesus is saying from that Eastern perspective and from that eternal perspective. And so this is what we've been going and doing for the last few weeks. This morning, I want to talk about the absolute fundamental shift that needs to occur in each one of us. And that starts intellectually, cognitively. We have to realize that there is a shift that needs to be taken, that we can't just approach Jesus from this modern Western point of view. But then that shift needs to really trickle down, and that just takes time. So that this different way of looking at life and looking at spirituality that Jesus has actually becomes a part of us and becomes so deeply a part of us that it becomes second nature, that it really isn't muscle memory, that we really do just naturally approach the moments of our lives with this different way of seeing. And if we're really going to follow Jesus, this is the turn that we need to take. When we talk about repentance, it's not just moving away from sinful or unlawful behavior as we normally understand sin. It's about moving into this whole different way of understanding life, seeing the way that we move through and participate with it. And the main thing that we talked about just a couple of weeks ago in terms of meaning of life, this meaning of life and spirituality and everything, is not a thing to be thought. It's actually a person to be experienced. And this changes everything. I mean, what is Western Christianity built on if it's not an actual creed, right? It's all about the creed. It's all about the book and the way we understand the book and the theology and the doctrine that comes from the book. That is all cognitive. And we stake everything on it. We say that our entrance into heaven, our acceptance by God, is based on understanding and accepting this doctrine. But what does Jesus tell us in John 14? You know, when he's asked, just show us the way, Lord, by Thomas. And that'll, then we can actually follow you. And he says, I am the way and the truth and the life. And no one comes to the Father but through me. But what is he really saying there? He's saying that truth and life are a person. Not a data point, not a factoid, but a person. And the way between the two is a person as well. What it is that we're trying to do here is know a person. Knowing truth and knowing life is actually knowing a person. Falling in love with the unfolding of a relationship as it naturally does unfold with any human relationship that we have. Do you think that our relationship with God is going to be any different? Yes. God is certain in terms of who God is, but we're still human. And so we're going to experience that relationship in the same way as an unfolding, as we as a human being are more and more able to accept more and more of who this other is. It's like any other relationship. Can we learn to fall in love with the unfolding of relationship, of life? And that means, are we willing to fall in love with mystery? Are we willing to fall in love with uncertainty? endless uncertainty and mystery, because that's what a relationship is. It's a constant and endless unfolding. And we're not going to be able to embrace this way of life that Jesus has for us in fear or through fear. It absolutely won't work, which is ironic because the church for centuries has been trying to scare us into the loving arms of God, and that just doesn't work. We can't do it through fear, because fear craves certainty. You can put that on your fridge. Fear craves certainty. Every time you're afraid, isn't that what you want? Don't you want something solid to hold on to? Don't you want the absolute ultimate answer? Of course. Fear craves certainty, and then it forces us to choose. It forces us to decide on one thing over another thing in our quest for certainty, which means we leave liminal space that we talk so much about. It means that we leave the paradoxical, which is where Jesus lives. He lives on that threshold. He lives between the horns of paradox, because that's where kingdom lives. That's where heaven lives. That's where God lives. If we are craving certainty, if we are feeling that we must choose one side or another in order to be certain, to have our foot on solid ground, then we are leaving the unfolding of this eternal now. The experience of this unfolding is something that we will not experience at all, because this is the opposite of faith. We think the opposite of faith is doubt. No, the opposite of faith is certainty. And as soon as we think we're certain, then the journey of experiencing truth as a person, life as a person, is out the window. Truth can't be given to us by anyone, not even the Bible. The Bible can't give us truth. It has to give us an experience of this person who is truth. And this shift is stopping looking at the spiritual quest as a data point, as a factoid, to accept in order to be acceptable. And a willingness just to engage in a continuous journey that takes us deeper and deeper. From the chapter in the effect called Between Heaven and Earth, we are all connected. We are all alone. We are alone in our connectedness, in finding connection with each other. In this life, we're never fully alone, and we're never fully connected either. We're never fully alone because there's a spirit of unity, alaha, guiding us. And yet we're never fully connected as long as we're breathing inside these individual and material bodies that keep us firmly entrenched in space and time and at arm's length from one another. We're never fully alone because our humanness makes certain experiences common to everyone. But we're never fully connected because our perceptions create unique filters that color each of those experiences uniquely. And the most important thing we can discover in our aloneness, the only thing worth having, and the reason why we're here, connection, unity, oneness, cannot be transferred or transmitted to another. Frustrating, but so necessary. For only when the journey has been personally experienced is it really ours to keep, as with everything we find along the way. To be connected, to be in unity, means to have traveled alone to the doorstep of another and know the place for the first time. Marion and I were flipping channels and came across an ad, and it was a theologian, pastor, author who was selling a book, and he made this statement that his goal was to take as many people to heaven as he could possibly take. And of course, hair on the back of my head stood up, back of my neck, I guess, it would not be the back of my head. And then my first thought was, the arrogance here is breathtaking that he would think he could take these people to heaven. But then I stopped and said, okay, let's give it the best spin possible. He really wants to help. I mean, he was very sincere in that. He wants to help. But think about the assumptions that he's making here. The assumption is that he's right. He has a version of truth that he can write down in a book and he can give you, and this truth will make you acceptable to God. He's assuming that. He has to be assuming that, or he wouldn't have made such a statement or written such a book. And of course, the flip side of that is that everybody else is wrong and is going to hell unless they get this truth. And so here we are right back again at this idea that this truth, this life, this salvation, this acceptance is some sort of data point that we can transmit to each other, we can give to one another. But when you think about it, it's really like giving a driver's license to somebody, but never having taught them how to drive. You got the certificate, but you don't have any of the real world experience. You don't have any of the skills. You have no idea what's going on behind the wheel. The truth of the matter is that no one can give you truth. No one can give it to you. No one can bestow it to you. No one can teach it to you, because nobody can give you a person. And we've got to make this shift. Truth is a person. It's not a fact. Only a person can give themselves to another person in the unfolding of a relationship. And so we either fall in love with the person who is truth and the person who is life, and learn to fall in love as our relationship unfolds along the way, or we are not going to understand what Jesus is talking about. That's how we know truth. No one can give us truth. No one can give you a truth that will change your life. Because as soon as you accept that truth as true, as certain, right, then the whole process of you learning through the unfolding stops. The whole process of you knowing truth as a person stops. Certainty stops the process. Certainty is the end of the line. Do you see how that works? Now, some of you are sitting there and disagreeing with me. Good. Glad to hear it. Now go out and become convinced of what you're convinced of. You see how this works? I'm not here to try to convince you of anything. I'm here to try to help you get ready to engage the unfolding of your life. That's what we're talking about here. The only way that we can know this truth of Jesus is to sort through and sift through all of the moments of our life and get to know what this is all about. First person, right here, never second person. Second little clip from the fifth way. The ancient Hebrews called this fact of life that we're talking about right now, right? This fact of life, they called it heaven and earth, Shemaya and Ara. Today's quantum physics calls it wave and particle. Heaven, the place of unity, of wave-like connection between everyone and everything. And earth, the place of particular individuality and form. Humans were understood to be occupying the space between heaven and earth, capable of both wave-like unity and particle-like form. So our job as humans is to bring heaven to earth and earth to heaven. In other words, to merge the two without losing the essence of either. To bring heaven to earth, to bring unity and connectedness to individual form and matter. To merge the particles into the wave is another way of looking at Yeshua's way of entering the kingdom of heaven. And so this idea of particle and wave has been banging around in my head a lot, because I love the fact that modern physics is catching up to what spirituality has known since we were writing on cave walls. It's amazing how this is coming back together again, and especially in the area of quantum mechanics, getting down to those tiniest particles, those subatomic particles, where everything seems to go haywire about the way that we understand life and physics and mechanics and all of that. But there is this thing in quantum mechanics called superposition. And I don't know if you've ever heard of this before. But what it is that this wave, when you are not looking at a subatomic particle, when it's just doing its thing, it's in what the physicists call superposition. That means it can have more than one place at a time, It can be in more than one place at a time. It can have more than one property at a time. In essence, it can be anything or anywhere in a sort of cloud of probability. But nothing is nailing it down. Everything is present all at once, and anything and everything is possible all at once until you look at it, until you measure it. And as soon as the observer measures it, the superposition field collapses into an individual form and function. Now you can say where the particle is, but only while you're measuring it and looking at it, because as soon as you look away, it floats back up into superposition again. I want you to think about that. See, I know it's a little bit mind-bending, but think about that for a second, because our experience of the process of life mirrors this, absolutely mirrors this. Think about heaven as superposition, okay? Everything possible existing at once, in unity, in heaven. No limits. Everything is there that can be there. And earth is the collapse into specific form and function. Heaven is unity. Earth, duality, of course, because it's broken down into individual form and function. Now, some physicists even go further, and this is really going to bake your noodle. They believe that consciousness itself is superposition resistant. So our consciousness can't hold this concept of multiple things existing at once, multiple positions, multiple properties existing at once. We can't hold that. So as soon as our consciousness looks at and measures these particles, that is what collapses superposition. So it's consciousness itself collapsing the superposition, because we can't handle the truth. We can't handle paradox. We can't handle the unresolved contradictions in life. And some of them go even further. They say that the collapse actually is what creates consciousness. All right, that's a little bit out of here. But you can see how far that these physicists are going in trying to understand this phenomena that exists at the core of our universe, at the core of life. This is all right here, right now. So think about it this way. We, as human beings, are born into superposition as infants. Just kind of like Doug was talking about. We're born into this place of undifferentiated presence. Presence before thought, before concept. We're born into that position. And that collapses on us the moment that we eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In other words, the moment that we become conscious, self-aware, the moment that we have that thought ability, then the superposition that we have been experiencing as infants collapses. And so our spiritual life, and more importantly, or more specifically, I should say, our contemplative life, is to remember and re-experience superposition. To remember and re-experience this all-at-onceness, this every-when-ness of heaven, but experienced here and now, not sometime later. Again, from the fifth way. This way of Yeshua is all about unlearning and learning, and each is as important as the other. From whatever moment we embark, there is something to unlearn and something to learn. In that order, because no one comes to the table completely empty. And the worst place to start is a place from which we think we already have the answers. Yeshua's teachings can form the signposts and milestones of our journey, but they're only as good as our ability to let go of everything we think we know in favor of what really is. That's the unlearning. And some will have more to unlearn than others. To empty all that out and stand naked again in the garden is a very good place to start. The only place, really. For if we don't first become like those little children, we can't enter kingdom at all. And so what Jesus is telling us is that we must lose that sense of self. He says it over and over again. Lose your life before you can gain it. Lose our sense of self. Unlearn our sense of this separate and collapsed self, this individual separate self, in order to be able to re-experience the connection to everything at once. That is this superposition state that we can get to in our prayer life, in contemplation, in worship, in life. Those moments that just rocket us out of ourselves. This is what the spiritual journey is all about. But remember, we are superposition resistant. We're not going to want to do this. We're not going to think that it's possible. We won't even think that it's of value. Because what we really want are straight, neat lines. We want answers. We want resolution. We want certainty. And the more fearful we are, the more fearful life gets, the more we're going to want that. The more we're going to be resistant to this position that keeps us in the mystery, keeps us in the uncertainty. There's a great story about a donkey that falls into a well. And I know I've told this in here before, but for some of you, maybe it'll be new. Donkey falls into a well, and they try everything they can to get the donkey out. They're throwing down lines and ropes, and they're doing this and that. Nothing works. Finally, the farmer says, okay, there's nothing we can do, but I was meaning to fill in that well anyway. We'll just bury the donkey down there, and we'll be done with it, So they start throwing shovels full of dirt down. And the first one that hits the donkey's back, that donkey freaks out and is braying down there and screaming, and another one and another one and another one. After a while, though, the donkey just gets quiet. And they're throwing down shovels full of dirt. And they say, what's going on down there? They look down. They throw down a shovel full of dirt. The donkey shakes it off and steps up. Another one shakes it off and steps up. Eventually, he just walks right out of the well. See, we want, in our fear especially, we want straight lifelines, solid lifelines to come right down out of the sunlight at the top of that well and pull us out directly. We consider that enlightenment, if we can be pulled up directly. But life doesn't work that way. Think about it. Life is indirect. It's curved. It's not straight. It's shovels full of dirt being dropped on us that we think is just the universe dumping on us again, something that is to be avoided, that we need to pray away. And yet if we can shake it off and step up, we realize that the process is not so much enlightenment, but endarkenment. Frank Billman used to hate when I used that word, if you remember, Frank. Endarkenment. But it's moving into the unknown, moving into the uncertain. Using those curved trajectories that are indirect, and they make us crazy as modern Westerners. But even they made Jesus followers crazy too, as we're going to find out through the parables. But this is the way it works. This is the way that it really happens. My pastoral teaching 30 years ago, 20 whatever years ago it was, when I first started learning to be a pastor, I remember this one teaching that came through, and this one old grizzled pastor teacher said, no one should preach the parables until they've been ministering for 20 years. And I'm sitting there as a 33, 35-year-old and thinking, oh, come on, I'll have to wait 20 years before I can preach the parables. But I understand now what he's talking about. Sometimes you just need enough decades behind you in the rearview mirror to make sense of certain things. You need enough of the panorama of life to be able to see what's really going on. It's a difference between understanding something intellectually and having the ability to experience it and know it from that experience. It just takes time. There's nothing else that substitutes for just the time that you've spent doing something. And so I didn't follow the rule, of course, and I was preaching the parables as soon as I was preaching. But now, these 30 years later, I get it. I get it. And I can only try to convey to you what I'm convinced of that I have gleaned in these years. But the reason that the parables are difficult is because they aren't straight lines. And if you are too young or too inexperienced or you haven't lived enough life, you don't understand that. You don't understand why they aren't straight. You want to make them straight, and you do damage to them by trying to interpret them in a specific way. The parables are curved. They're indirect. They're shovels of dirt being dropped down on us. The word matla in Aramaic, which we have translated as parable, means that, but it also means a riddle. It can literally mean a riddle, as we understand that. And what does a riddle do? What does a parable do? It reveals and hides at the very same time. It creates a process. It creates a journey in your mind to an experience where you can lose your sense of self in the riddle, in the story, just like you do in a good book, right? Don't you lose your sense of self in a good book? You are part of that story in a good movie. Why do we love them so much? Because they take them out of ourselves, take us out of our lives as we understand them, and drop us into something exotic, something different, something we haven't experienced before. The parables are doing the same kind of thing. They are helping us to take an experience, take a journey. And these journeys allow us to then bypass the intellect, bypass the bias, the preconceptions, bypass the parts of us that are resistant to superposition. That's what the journey is all about. The journey is the point, not the answer, not the interpretation. Taking the journey is the whole point. Let's take a look at a parable starting at Matthew 13, verse 3. Very famous one about the sower, right? And he spoke many things to them in parables, saying, Behold, the sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell beside the road, and the birds came and ate them up. Others fell on the rocky places, where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up, but because they had no depth of soil, when the sun had risen, they were scorched, and because they had no root, they withered away. Others fell among the thorns, and the thorns came up and choked them out. And others fell on the good soil and yielded a crop, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. Who has ears, let him hear. And this is a favorite saying of Jesus. Who has ears, let them hear. Can you hear it in a different way? Can you please try to hear it in a different way and not the usual way that you would process things? Now, this parable is typically called the parable of the sower, but it really should be called the parable of the four soils, because this is about the soil. And the soil is us. We are the four soils, the four different types of ways that we can respond to something that is completely new, kind of alien, out there someplace. And this parable and the following parable that we're going to take a look at are the only two parables of Jesus, about 40 parables that he tells in the New Testament, that he actually explains. Doesn't explain any of the other 38, but he does explain these two. And yet, any explanation, even Jesus' explanation, is a collapse of the superposition of the parable itself, the saying itself, which has all these possible meanings in it, because it's a journey that we are taking. But because his disciples are so frustrated, he finally relents and gives them an explanation. But it's only one possible explanation. And here it is, starting at verse 18. Hear then the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is the one on whom seed was sown beside the road. The one on whom seed was sown on the rocky places. This is the man who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no firm root in himself, but is only temporary. And when affliction or persecution arises because of the word, immediately he falls away. And the one on whom seed was sown among the thorns, this is the man who hears the word. And the worry of the world and its deceitfulness of wealth choke the word, and it becomes unfruitful. And the one on whom the seed was sown on good soil, this is the man who hears the word and understands it, and who indeed bears fruit and brings forth some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. Even the Aramaic language itself, the Hebrew language itself, carries many possible meanings. We've talked about this before. Ancient languages had very narrow vocabularies, not that very many words, but each word had multiple meanings. And then in those Semitic languages that were root and pattern systems, you can go back from the word to the root word, to the child root and the parent root, and each of those roots have meanings. And then the letters that compose those roots have meanings. And that whole, it's like a tree from the roots up to the branches. All of that meaning is possible. If you've ever read an Aramaic, a native speaker, scholar, translating passages from the Bible from the Aramaic, there is not just one translation. There's usually about a dozen of them, at least 6 to 8 different translations, because all of those different translations are possible at the same time. It's the way the language works. And then doubled onto that is the parable itself, which is designed as a story to take you on a journey. All of that meaning is possible all at once, at the same time, in superposition, until you choose one. And then it collapses. This is the way it works. We read a parable like this, and the explanation even seems to drive it further in, that we're thinking about separate people, right? Believers and unbelievers. Those who are faithful, those who are unfaithful, right? Those who hear the word and they do something with it, and those who don't. But if we're really going to let this sing for us and actually let it work on us as individuals trying to follow Jesus, we need to realize that the 4 soils are also all the different parts of ourselves interiorly. It's not about different people, or it could be, but it also can be about ourselves. And this is where it really gets important. This is where it gets useful and strong for us to realize that we are all 4 soils at once, at the same time, working through the process of life. We've all had misunderstandings, haven't we? Especially when it comes to spiritual matters, when it comes to doctrine, when we hear the Bible, the Word of God. How many times have we misunderstood it? For how long did we misunderstand it? And then when we did understand it, when we thought that we really were getting it, and we had that great sense of joy or a conversion moment, only to find ourselves cooling off after a while or falling away because we didn't have the roots yet developed. Or the world comes in, and the worry of the world, or somebody dies, or some tragedy hits us, and suddenly nothing that we thought we understand that was giving us a sense of firmness makes any sense anymore. There's no meaning anymore. It all seems like just a bunch of hooey, and we turn our backs and walk away. Haven't we all experienced all of those? And then through all of that, maybe we get to the other side, where we really have that sense of enlightenment through endarkenment, where everything starts to take hold, and we realize now we do have something that is built on the rock that can withstand the difficulties of life. We are all 4 of the soils. This is not an event. This is a process. We are being asked to unchoose just one interpretation and allow everything to start to flower within us. If we can do that, this changes everything about the nature of our relationship with life. We move from a passive believer cognitively to an active participant in this becoming, this unfolding of life. Let's take a look at this second parable, starting at, again, Matthew 13, but now verse 24. Jesus presented another parable. And he said, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed tares among the wheat and went away. But when the wheat sprouted and bore grain, the tares also became evident. The slaves of the landowner came and said to him, Sir, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have tares? And he said to them, an enemy has done this. The slave said to him, Do you want us then to go and gather them up? But he said, No. For while you are gathering up the tares, you may uproot the wheat with them. Allow both to grow together until the harvest. And in the time of the harvest, I will say to the reapers, First gather up the tares and bind them in bundles to burn them up, but gather the wheat into my barn. And so here we have more gardening imagery, as opposed to the warrior, right? More gardening imagery, more farmer imagery. But we also have this imagery of a seeming judgment, right? What are we going to do with that? Especially in the explanation. Take a look at the explanation starting at verse 36. Then he left the crowds and went into the house, and his disciples came to him and said, Explain to us the parables of the tares of the field. Yeah, they can't handle the truth either. They can't handle superposition. They want to know, what is this all about? They're trying to get a specific answer. And so he says to them, The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man, and the field is the world. And as for the good seed, these are the sons of the kingdom, and the tares are the sons of the evil one. And the enemy who sowed them is the devil, and the harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire, so shall it be at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks, and those who commit lawlessness, and throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. He who has ears, let him hear. And so here's Jesus' explanation to them. It's the interpretation they needed right then at that moment, especially going into what he knew was coming in the next 30 years and the Roman complete destruction of Jerusalem and the temple. This is what they needed to hear at this point. And it seems to create then this us and them duality, right? They are not going to make it, but we are going to make it. Here's that us and them feeling again. But remember, parables are extended similes. A simile is like something else. The first line is, the kingdom of heaven may be compared to. Often he says the kingdom of heaven is like, and then he gives the parable. So you have an extended simile here. The kingdom, though, is Jesus' super metaphor for superposition. Kingdom is that state of life that we can enter into right now, where we have the connection of everything at once. And so we have to remember, he's giving us this parable in the context of kingdom. And so if we take a deeper look, we're going to again see how this parable can apply to us within ourselves, because within ourselves is the only place that kingdom exists. Remember Luke 17, he said, you're not going to find kingdom out there someplace. The kingdom is within. It's in the midst of. It's right here. It's right now. And so keeping all that context in mind, let's take a look at just tares. What does tares mean? Zizana in Aramaic. Zizana means weeds or the inedible type of plants that don't have any real purpose. You can't eat them, right? So they're unfruitful and they're unproductive. That's been translated into tare in our language, which comes from Middle French, which means wastage in goods. So if you had goods that you shipped and some of it got broken, that's a tare, that's wastage. Imperfection, it can mean that as well. And then that from Middle French went to the Italian. The Italian tara means a thing that is deducted or a thing that is rejected. Have you ever followed a truck and you see tare weight on the back of the truck? You know what that means? That's the weight of the truck itself. So when it goes on the scales, you can take the gross weight, subtract the tare weight, and you get the weight of the actual goods, right? This is the thing deducted. This is the thing that doesn't count. This is the thing that is unproductive. So within ourselves, what are we talking about here? What is the thing that is deducted? What is the thing that seems unproductive? Well, we're talking about our shadow. And you've probably heard this before about our shadow selves. But the thing that we don't typically understand about shadow is that it's not something that's just bad. We think of the shadow as being a bad thing. Shadow's not necessarily bad. It's just what's been repressed. It's what we, starting in childhood, learned did not go well with mom and dad, did not go well with the family, did not go well at church or school or anywhere else. We got punished for it. If we did X, we got punished. So what did we learn to do? We suppressed it. We repressed it. We learned to just pretend that it wasn't even there. And a lot of that stuff was acting out harmfully. And so it wasn't something that was good for us or for anyone else. But some of the stuff was merely inconvenient at the time. And it was things that we really need in ourselves. And the truth is that all the parts of ourselves need to be reintegrated for our journey to be complete. You can't live half a life just with what you've chosen to project to the people around you and forget the shadow. That has to be integrated. And some of that shadow stuff is what is going to serve you so well as an asset as you get older, as the context changes, the circumstances change. I wanted to read just a couple paragraphs here of a sermon that someone gave. But listen to this. He says, I'm recalling a teenager who was pretty rambunctious. Didn't listen to his mother, made fun of her. He moved in with a girl as a teenager and got her pregnant. I'm sure MTV influenced him to do this, all those reality shows. After living with this girl for 15 years, he dumped her and moved in with another. He became engaged to this second woman, thinking it would advance his career. The engagement was a long one, 2 years. And during the engagement, he hooked up with a third woman. In the midst of all this licentiousness, he left the church he was brought up in by his mother and joined a cult. Eventually, he became bored with the cult and became a skeptic. What do we do with someone like him? Is he a wheat or a weed? Is there any hope for a rascal like that? Well, his name was Augustine of Hippo, who would later be called Saint Augustine, one of the most important theologians and church leaders of the first 500 years of church history. His Confessions may be the most profound and important spiritual biography ever penned. Augustine was a wheat who resembled and acted more like a weed in his earlier years. So one reason we don't pluck up the weeds is that we can't tell them apart very easily. And so here you have a situation. It's not just that Augustine repented of his youthful indiscretions and his youthful behavior and then started acting lawfully. It's that he refocused those useful energies in a completely different direction. He didn't lose them. He refocused them. They were essential to who he was, and they were essential to who he became, not only for himself, but for the entire Western Church. He wrote these amazing words, "My heart is restless until it rests in thee. My heart is restless until I rest in thee." His constant need, search for connection, for love, his unwillingness to settle for anything less than whatever it was that was driving him forward, that willfulness, that willingness to violate the norms of his society around him was exactly what made him the theologian that reformed the church in the first 500 years. Do you see what we're talking about here? You don't pull those things up, but you do have to go down deep into the shadow and find out what's there. See what's useful, see what's not, in order to be able to be the full person that we can be. This is falling in love with the unfolding. It's what it's all about. How would this change your relationship with Jesus' teaching, with his parables, with his way, if you started to look at it like this? One last bit. Dominic Crossan, another famous theologian, stresses that parable as poetic metaphor creates participation in the metaphor's meaning. Participation in the metaphor's meaning. Because one can only experience its reality by risking entrance into it. He then argues that not only do the parables of Jesus reflect the temporality of Jesus' experience of God and establish the historicity of Jesus' response to kingdom, they create and establish the historical situation of Jesus himself. In other words, Jesus was not crucified for speaking parables, but for ways of acting that resulted from the experience of God presented in the parables. These poetic metaphors, he asserts, portray a permanent eschatology, the continuous presence of God as the one who challenges the world and repeatedly shatters its complacency. This kingdom of God and its parables manifest an advent of radical new world of possibility, a reversal of ordinary expectations in the past, and a call to action as an expression of the new world with new possibilities. The parables must be lived out to be understood. You can't just do it intellectually. It needs to be internalized as an absolute call to action. If we continue to see them as only outside ourselves, if we continue to see them as talking about distinct and separate people between us and others, we're going to miss the point entirely. It's going to make us passive. It's going to make us reliant on our intellect. We're going to actually believe we have the certainty of our beliefs that will take us out of the process, out of love with the unfolding of life as a relationship with a person, with mystery, with that uncertainty. We're going to be relegated back to the sidelines again, looking at truth and life as data, as factoids, but nothing that ever really penetrates, nothing that ever really changes anything. Jesus' way is a person too. It's the embrace of what we can't understand, but we can experience as unfolding in our lives. And if we really fall in love with this person, with this mystery, if we're willing to lose ourselves in this process, in this relationship, we will merge heaven and earth in our own hearts. Move ourselves back into that superposition where everything exists at once. Everything is possible at once. And in that moment of self-forgetting, because that's the only way this works, when you forget about yourself, you move into this other place. In that moment of self-forgetting, we are home again. You can call it kingdom, you can call it heaven, you can call it source, you can call it God, but we're home again. This is where we came from. This is where we are now, except for our heads that shelve us away. And this is where we're returning to. And then in that next moment, when we come back to our senses, right? And we start thinking again, as we must as human beings. It's always this oscillation. Then the superposition of heaven and kingdom collapses. And we are back to individual form and function. But we can remember where we were. We can remember what's on the other side of that curtain. And we can know that we are infinitely more than just the particle that we or our circumstances of life have chosen for us. We're more than all that. And that changes everything. Then we can learn to balance these two states in our heart. And we can live the kingdom that Jesus is trying to get us to understand first and then merge into. Let's pray. Father, there is so much going on right now. Sometimes it's hard to focus. Whether it's macro, whether it's micro, whether it's in our own lives or in the lives of the ones that we love, there's so much going on. There is so much uncertainty. There is so much that hurts so bad that we don't understand why it's even being allowed in our lives. Help us through this. All times, but especially the difficult ones. That if we can stay faithful in continuing to put one foot in front of the other in the direction that we believe to go, that we will always find you at the center of all of our moments. And that will be enough for us, for this moment. Help us not to be diverted. Help us not to become weary in the well-doing or become desperate in the pain so much that we don't keep our direction, don't keep our focus on you. Help us right there, Father. Because in you is the only resolution that we will ever find. You keep all of the balls in the air, all the plates spinning, everything possible at once. And that's our home. And we want to be with you, Lord. Father, never let us forget we can only love because you loved us first. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's all stand.